You didn't fail because you're weak. You failed because you were taught to use the wrong tool for the wrong job. Your whole life someone has told you that the problem is willpower, that if you really wanted it, you could achieve it. That discipline is a matter of character. That those who succeed get there because they push themselves harder. That's a lie. And that lie, it has cost you years of your life. In 1973, neuroscientist Roy Baumeister conducted a series of experiments that shook Western psychology. He discovered that willpower behaves exactly like a muscle. Just like muscle, willpower, he gets tired. He called it that ego depletion. Ego depletion. The more decisions you make, the more you push yourself, the less mental reserve you have for the next battle. Willpower is a finite resource. Here's what Baumeister didn't know. In the century 18, the samurai of the Rinzai Zen school developed a mental state called Mushin, literally in which means empty, anshin, which means mind, empty mind, mindless mind. A state where action occurs without deliberation, without effort, without expenditure of any resources. This state is achieved by someone who he trained until his internal resistance ceased to exist. Baumeister studied the exhaustion of willpower. The samurai taught how to eliminate the need for willpower completely. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the difference between willpower and Mushin, and I'll explain why you don't need willpower, and how the belief that you need it is hindering you more than anything else in life. Before we get to the content, I want to leave a quick message. This channel is for people who have already understood that philosophy is not intellectual decoration. It's ancient technology for modern problems. If you are one of those people, you're in the right place. Subscribe now because the next video this channel will publish is about Miyamoto Musashi's secret to becoming unbeatable at anything. You won't want to miss this. Thank you so much for your attention and for the affection of all of you who follow me. I am extremely grateful to have you here with me. Now, let's go to the video. Chapter 1. The Wrong Diagnosis. What you'll understand here, why James's problem, and perhaps yours, was never what it seemed. Today I'm going to tell you the story of a young man named James. James was 24 years old and lived in the guest room of his parents' house in Seattle. That wasn't the plan. It never was. But 3 months ago, a mid-sized tech company terminated his contract, a well-paying position with subsidized training, internal mentorship, and support. They had invested in him, and James had failed, not for lack of intelligence, but because of an inconsistency that no one could explain, not even him. Deadlines that he saw clearly on Monday vanished by Wednesday. Projects that started with energy became a burden by Thursday. The work piled up, the excuses too. When the dismissal came, the human resources manager had said with clinical care, "James, you have real potential. The problem is that you don't show up consistently." James knew he had to solve this problem, and he had tried using productivity apps, waking up earlier, the Pomodoro technique, priority lists. Each new tool lasted days, sometimes a week. Then the pattern returned: hesitation, procrastination, inconsistent performance, shame. His personal diagnosis was simple: lack of willpower. He wasn't disciplined enough. He needed to push himself harder. So amidst bitterness at knowing he had enormous potential but was underutilizing it, which caused his deep sadness, he decided to see a psychologist to understand himself and why he couldn't simply overcome procrastination and inconsistency. James's psychologist was named Dr. Sarah Chen. She had a small practice in Capitol Hill, a simple office, 2 leather armchairs, natural light. No motivational posters on the wall, no quotes about resilience. In the first session, James gave his own diagnosis before she even asked anything. "I know what my problem is. I lack willpower, I never have. It was the same when I was a child. I start things full of energy, but I never finish. I can't handle pressure for very long. I need to learn to push myself harder." Dr. Chen listened to everything. Then she remained silent for a few seconds. "James, how long did it take you to develop this explanation?" "What?" "This theory about yourself, that you lack willpower, that you need to force yourself more. How long have you carried this burden?" he thought. About 10 years, maybe. And did it ever work? Did it work if I pushed it harder? James opened his mouth. He closed it. The answer was no, but he had never phrased it that way before. If a tool doesn't work after 10 years of use, James, maybe the problem isn't how much you use it. That, perhaps it's the tool. He returned home that day with a phrase stuck in his head that wouldn't leave his mind. Perhaps the problem isn't the tool. Perhaps it's the wrong tool. During the following week, he did something that wasn't part of the therapy plan. He started reading, not self-help. He'd been reading self-help for years. He began reading about how the brain actually works when it acts consistently. And then, through a path he himself couldn't explain, he arrived at the Japanese philosophy of martial arts. And he found a word that had no simple translation: Mushin. An interesting detail is that the Drachan had a post-it note in her desk drawer. James didn't know. It read in small print, "It's not a lack of effort, it's a lack of resistance." Now I want to take a moment here, because perhaps you find yourself in the same situation as James was. Perhaps you've believed your whole life that your problem was a lack of willpower, a lack of determination, when in reality, you're fighting the problem with the wrong tool. There's no point in trying harder if your system is wrong. For example, let's suppose you want to start waking up at 5 a.m., but you go to bed after 1 a.m. Because of this, you can't wake up at 5 a.m., and you believe you failed because you are weak and undisciplined, when in reality, you sabotaged yourself. The problem lies in your system, in your tool. You might be thinking right now, but how will Mushin help you solve this problem? Chapter 2. What the Samurai Knew. What you'll understand here, why Mushin isn't motivation, isn't discipline, and isn't what you think it is. There is a text from the century 17 called Hagakure, the Book of the Samurai, dictated by Yamamoto Tsunetomo, a warrior who spent the last years of his life in monastic seclusion after the death of his lord. In it, Tsunetomo wrote something that few Western commentators understand in depth. In a state of perfect clarity, there is no distinction between attacker and attacked, between the action and the agent. This is not poetry. It is a precise technical description of a neurological state. When a samurai achieved Mushin in combat, what occurred at the nervous system level was the following. Decision-making had migrated from the prefrontal cortex, the region that deliberates, evaluates, weighs options, and expends energy, to the basal ganglia and cerebellum. These are older, faster brain regions that operate outside of executive consciousness and do not depend on cognitive reserves. The warrior didn't decide to attack. The movement just happened. But here is what historical documents clearly record, and what popular interpretation of the Mushin almost always distorts. Mushin was not a state that the samurai discovered by accident. It wasn't inspiration. It was the predictable product of a specific and exhaustive practice called sei. Sequences of movements repeated thousands of times, without variation, without shortcuts, without haste. The kata was not for learning the movement, it was for the movement to cease requiring attention. For the mind to be empty, because there was nothing left to deliberate. The goal of the training wasn't strength, it was silence. In 2009, a researcher named Philippa Lally, from University College London, published a study that quietly debunked the myth of the 21 days it takes to form habits. The popular number, that any behavior becomes automatic in 21 days, never had an empirical basis. It was derived from a casual observation by a plastic surgeon in the 1960s. Lally's study followed 96 participants for 12 weeks. The conclusion, true automaticity, the point at which behavior occurs without conscious deliberation, took an average of 66 days. And it depended on a critical variable that no habit tracking app measures. It wasn't the frequency, it was the absence of internal conflict. The people who automated the fastest weren't the ones who pushed themselves the hardest. They were the ones who created conditions where resistance simply couldn't find a foothold. The samurai called this process Mushin no kokoro, mind without obstacle. Modern science calls it consolidation in the basal ganglia. The mechanism is identical. The difference is that the Japanese had a training protocol. Western science only has the description. James spent 3 nights reading about Mushin. not on productivity websites, in texts about martial arts, in analyses of Zen applied to combat, in transcripts of interviews with kendo masters who were trying to explain the inexplicable in words. What he found disturbed him in a way he hadn't expected. Across all sources, the pattern is the same. Mushin is not the destination. It's what's left when you remove the noise. And the noise, in his case, had a name. It was the voice that evaluated each task before it began. It was the weight of deciding whether it was worthwhile. It was the constant internal negotiation between what he should do and what he wanted to do. It was willpower, precisely the tool he relied on, creating the problem it promised to solve. There is a paradox at the heart of Mushin philosophy that the texts rarely make explicit. The more you try to reach the state of empty mind, the more you block it. The attempt is the obstacle. The protocol is not to try harder. It is to remove what prevents it. Chapter 3. The Internal War. Now you will understand why willpower is not weakness. It's a symptom of a system that needs to be rebuilt, not forced. By the 5th session with Dr. Chen, James had changed. Not euphoric, quiet, like someone who has understood something and is still processing how that understanding changes things. "I read about Mushin," he said. The therapist nodded without surprise. "And then I realized something. Every time I reached an important deadline at work, I had a war in my head. Not a war about whether I wanted to do the work. I did. But a war about how to start, whether I was ready, whether it would be good enough, whether it was worth the effort. And when I finally resolved that war and started, I was already exhausted." How much of this war was conscious? Almost none. It was happening before I realized it was happening. Dr. Chen leaned slightly forward. "James, what you're describing has a technical name. It's called anticipatory overthinking, the habit of mentally simulating multiple scenarios before any action, consuming cognitive resources before the task even begins. For people with this pattern, willpower doesn't solve the problem. In truth, it feeds him, because you use willpower to start the internal war, and then you use even more willpower to try to win it. So what solves it? You've already read the answer. The kata, the repetition that removes negotiation, the system that makes the decision irrelevant because there is no decision left to make. James remained quiet for a while. When the samurai trained the kata, and he said slowly, they weren't learning how to move the sword, they were unlearning how to decide how to move the sword. Exactly. So the problem was never my willpower, the problem was that I never trained so that I wouldn't need it. Silence. And then something inside James settled. Here's the fact that changes everything. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, in his research on cognition and decision-making, he identified what he called somatic markers, patterns of emotional and physical response that the body develops through repetition and which come to guide action before conscious thought is activated. In simple terms, the body learns to crave what you've trained it to do, not metaphorically, neurologically. The limbic system, responsible for emotions and motivation, begins to emit signals of positive anticipation for behaviors that have been repeated sufficiently. Pleasure doesn't come after the action. It begins to appear before, as a trigger, as an impulse, as a movement towards behavior. The samurai called this Mushin no Michi, the mindless path. When you get there, you don't force yourself to practice. You are drawn into practice. But, and here's where almost everyone stumbles, you don't start there. You build the path that leads you there, and the path demands exactly the opposite of what the culture of willpower preaches. Chapter 4. The 21-Day Protocol. Now I'm going to give you a protocol, but what you'll understand here, this is why 21 days don't create a habit, but they can deactivate the resistance that prevents the habit from existing. Dr. Chen gave James an instruction that on the surface seemed too simple to be serious. For 21 days you will choose one action, just one, small enough that you can't come up with a good reason not to do it, and you will perform this action every day at the same time without evaluation, without reflection on whether it was done well, without judging the result. Just execution. Which action? That depends on you, but it needs to have 3 characteristics. It needs to be relevant to what you want to build, not random. It needs to be small enough that the hurdle to starting is 0, and it needs to have a clear trigger, a time, a context, an anchor that already exists in your routine, James thought. The job he wanted to do well involved product development, writing technical specifications, analysis and synthesis. I'm going to write 1 page a day. It can be anything. An analysis, an idea, a specification. 1 page, every day at 7 in the morning. Okay, and one more instruction, which is the most important of all. You're not going to try to write well. You're not going to try to write correctly. You're just going to sit down and produce the page. The criterion for success is existence, not quality. James hesitated. But if I don't care about quality, I'm not going to improve. James, in this protocol, you're not training writing. You're training the absence of negotiation. Mushin doesn't begin with excellence. It begins with the elimination of the conflict between intention and action. The first 6 days were strange. James would sit down at 7 in the morning with his notebook open. He would write a page, not always a good one, sometimes fragmented, sometimes just a series of unconnected ideas. But the page existed. What he noticed from the 5th day onwards was not quality, it was absence. The voice that had been assessing before starting grew quieter. It didn't disappear, but it lost volume. The nervous system had received the same response 5 times in a row. When it's time to write, you sit down and write, without deliberation, without wait, without war. On the 10th day, he realized he was sitting down before the alarm went off. On the 15th day, he felt something he hadn't expected, impatience to begin. It wasn't motivation in the popular sense, euphoria, energy, enthusiasm. It was body signaling, this is the moment, the somatic marker that Damasio, he described it, the limbic system learning to anticipate. On the 21st day, James didn't check the alarm, he didn't check the list, he didn't negotiate with himself. He just woke up, made coffee, and sat down. The page happened. He stared at the screen for a minute after he finished, because he recognized what had just happened. The action had taken place without him. Not without your presence, but without his interference. That was Mushin. Here's what the 21 days really do, and what they don't do. They don't create the habit. A real habit at the neurological level takes longer. What the 21 days do is more specific and more important. They silence the initial resistance. They teach the nervous system that the action is not dangerous, that no deliberation is necessary, that the path between intention and execution can be direct. The samurai spent years practicing kata, because inner silence doesn't settle in over weeks. The 21 days aren't the destination. They're the first time you prove to your own nervous system that Mushin is possible. And once the nervous system learns this, once the body registers the experience of acting without conflict, it begins to seek that experience again, not because you want to, because you trained. There's a detail in the historical records of Zen training that almost never comes up in Western discussions about productivity or habits. The kata wasn't practiced with maximum intensity, it was practiced with calm precision. Physical exertion was considered secondary. What mattered was the quality of attention, undivided, non-evaluative, non-anxious. The goal was the internal state, not external performance. The samurai understood, before neuroscience, that the nervous system learns not only what you do, but how are you while doing. Chapter 5. What James discovered. Here you will learn about the twist nobody talks about in Mushin and what changes when you stop fighting yourself. 3 months after being fired, James had a folder on his computer with 67 pages of written material. Not all of them were good. Some were fragments. Some were analyses that led nowhere. But 67 pages existed, and they existed because he had removed the obstacle that prevented their existence. This obstacle was not laziness, it wasn't a lack of discipline, and it wasn't a lack of willpower. It was at negotiation. He came to understand something about himself that 10 years of superficial self-knowledge hadn't revealed. He was never a person lacking willpower, he was a person with excessive deliberation. Every action passed through such an exhaustive evaluation filter that the action arrived diminished if it arrived at all. The problem wasn't a lack of force, it was excessive internal friction. Mushin hadn't given James more willpower. He had removed the place where willpower was spent. In one of the final sessions with Dr. Chen, he asked something that had been on his mind since the beginning. Why did the samurai call it an empty mind? It doesn't seem like the mind is empty when you're in Mushin. It seems like in mind is more present than ever. The therapist considered the question carefully, because what is empty is not the mind. It is noise. Mushin is not the absence of consciousness. It is consciousness without interference from the ego. The mind is fully present, but it is not judging what happens, evaluating whether it is good enough, or negotiating whether it should be happening. It simply observes and responds. James remained quiet. So willpower is literally the opposite of what I need. Willpower presupposes two conflicting sides, what you should do and what you want to do. It exists to force one side to win. Mushin dissolves the conflict before it even begins. And that's why it doesn't hold up. Because you can force a battle once, 10 times, 50 times, but you can't force the same conflict forever. Exactly. Willpower is finite. Trained silence is not. 2 months after that conversation, James had been hired by a smaller company. Not the most glamorous position, not the salary he had initially wanted. But he showed up, every day, without hesitation, without the internal negotiation that previously consumed more energy than the work itself. The daily page had expanded into a work system, because when you remove resistance at one point, it dissolves at adjacent points. One Monday morning, a colleague casually commented, "James, you're the most consistent guy with whom I've already worked. How do you do that?" James thought for a moment. I stopped trying to force myself. His colleague looked at him, confused. James didn't explain. Some things become clearer in silence. Here's what nobody mentions when talking about Mushin. Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest swordsman Japan has ever recorded, undefeated in 61 duels, author of the Book of Five Rings. He spent the last years of his life not training in combat. He spent his days painting, writing, and practicing calligraphy. When asked why he had abandoned the sword, he would correct the premise of the question. I didn't practice swordsmanship to become the best swordsman. I practiced swordsmanship to learn how the mind works when it's not in the way. What Musashi had discovered, and what took decades of combat to see clearly, was that the sword was merely the vehicle. Destiny was the inner state. Mushin was not a martial skill, it was a way of being, and once learned in one domain, it transfers. James learned Mushin from a blank page at 7 in the morning. Musashi learned it in battles that no one would survive today. The form is different. The mechanism is identical. The training was always about silence. Domination was always secondary. 3 things remain. Willpower is not a virtue. It's a symptom of a divided system. When you need to force yourself, there are 2 parts of you at war, and internal wars aren't won with more strength. Sand they resolve when the conflict loses the ground on which it grows. Mushin is neither talent nor enlightenment. It is the predictable result of a specific protocol. Choose an action small enough that there is no negotiation. Perform it daily in the same context, without quality assessment, without judging the result. 21 days. Do not create a habit. They teach the nervous system that there is no need for deliberation. And when deliberation disappears, the habit is born on its own. James's problem was never a lack of strength. It was too much friction. And perhaps yours is too. James still lives in Seattle. The guest room has become his own office. The 67 pages have become a work method that he doesn't explain well, but executes every day. In his last session with Dr. Chen, she said something that he still carries with him. You didn't learn to discipline yourself, James. You learned to stop fighting with yourself, which is exactly the opposite and exactly what worked. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't is rarely one of strength. It's those who understood that the battle isn't out there, and the victory doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like silence. If you've made it this far, you've already proven that you can sustain your attention on a difficult idea until the very end. That's no small feat. Sign up. Because the next time you need to hear something like that, you want to make sure it shows up on your screen. If you want to continue down this path, One of these videos that's appearing now was made specifically for what you're experiencing. Thank you for your attention so far, and always remember, be present, walk with honor, follow the path. Until the next video.